What is going on, guys? It's Modded Dwarf here. Welcome back to another video on the Xbox Series X, another hardware tutorial. So in this video, I'm going to be attempting to change the LEDs in the Series X in the actual console and in the controller, the power LED, so you can change it with any other color that you want. If you don't like white for whatever reason, you can change it to a different color. This is particularly great if you're doing some kind of customization, whether you're, doing some kind of custom paint job on the controller or on the console, or if you're, getting like a D-brand skin or something for the console. It's really a nice touch to change the LED. You can change it to whatever color matches your, skin or paint job that you're doing to the console. It just adds that finishing touch. So yeah, we're going to try and attempt to do that here in this video. To start off with, the kind of LEDs that are required are 0805 LEDs for the controller and 1206 LEDs for the console. And these can technically be kind of changed. They don't have to be the exact size. That is just the correct size for the console and the controller. But you can get away with using an 0805 LED on the controller and on the console, or even an 0603 LED on the controller and the console as well. You will get away with that. They will work. But, if you want to get the right amount of brightness and everything, then you should get the correct LED size for the console and the controller. So 1206 for the console and 0805 for the controller. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take apart the console. Now, I've already done a full video on how to tear down the console and put it back together. I'll link that in the description and in the cards in the top right hand corner. But we're not going to open up the console all the way up. We're just going to open it to the point where we take the console out of the case so that we can get access to the RF board, the board on the front of the console that is used, that has the power button and the eject button on it. So we're going to take that out, that PCB. There's about 4 screws there that you take out, and then it just pops out with the ribbon cable attached. And you can take that out with the LED on there. So if you flip it upside down, the LED is on the underside. Okay, so now that we have the board out of the console, we're going to tape it here to the desk so that it doesn't move around when I'm trying to take off the LED. And then what we're going to have to do now, the easiest way to do this, if you had the right tools, would be to use some hot tweezers so that you can heat up both ends of the LED and lift it off the board. That would be a nice clean solution of doing this. But unfortunately, I don't have hot tweezers. I'm sure most people watching this probably don't. They might have a soldering iron, but that's about it. So I'm just going to use a regular soldering iron, which is going to make this a little bit messy. But what I'm going to do is add some solder to both points so we get a good blob of solder on both ends of the LED. And then once that's done, I'm then going to try and heat up both ends, just switch the iron back and forth really quickly to try and get to a point where both ends are kind of hot and melted at the same time. That way the LED will lift off the board, because obviously if you just heat one end, then it's not gonna budge. So you have to keep moving the iron back and forth. And yeah, as you can see here, I've made a bit of a mess. I've got solder on the ground point that's right next to the LED, which is fine. But unfortunately, I make a pretty big mistake here. And as you can see, a ball of solder and the iron touches the power button. So that could be really bad. Luckily, it didn't cause any problems, but that can be a real big issue. So what I would recommend you do is cover up that power button with another piece of tape or something before doing this. That way you avoid, a situation like that happening. Because if you get too much solder on the power button, you could end up breaking the power button or causing it to bridge, so it's constantly switching on and off or something like that. So you want to make sure that that power button is covered with some tape or something, some duct tape or electrical tape. Okay, so now that we have the LED off, the next thing that I'm going to do is just get some desolder bead or desolder wire, whatever you call it, and try and get all the excess solder off the pads, because if we leave the solder on the pads, then the LED is not going to sit flat on the board. So we're just going to use the desolder bead here to get as much excess solder off those pads so that there's no solder on the pads, and we can just sit the LED flat on top of the pad right there. And then it looks a mess right now. Obviously, there's a lot of kind of burnt bits and stuff that's all over there, but that can easily be cleaned up despite how bad it looks with some rubbing alcohol, some isopropyl alcohol. I'm going to use a Q-tip first of all to clean as much off as possible. Then I'm going to use a Q-tip with isopropyl alcohol on there, and that will clean it up nicely so it looks brand new. And then all we have to do is get our replacement LED. So we're just going to peel it off here and drop the LED onto the board. And then what we need to do after that is turn the LED over to the other side so that we can see the little marking on the bottom. And on the bottom of the LED, there's a marking. It's either going to be an arrow or a T. So as you can see, this one is a T. But if you can imagine joining up the edges of that T with a line, then it basically makes it into an arrow. So you essentially want the arrow to line up with the arrow that's already on the board. So you can see that arrow on the board that shows positive and negative. So you just want to make sure that the LED is aligned so that the arrow on the LED is facing the same direction as the one on the board. That way the positive and negative will be lined up correctly. So once you've confirmed that, we can then just tip the LED over, turn the LED over to the correct position. So what I'm going to do is put a bit of solder on the iron and then hold the LED with the tweezers over the pad and then just touch one end with the soldering iron, which will tack it in place. And then I can come in and add some more solder and then come into the other side and add some solder on the other side. And then that will secure it in place and it should be connected and ready to go. So yeah, once that's done, obviously I'll just go ahead and clean off again the excess flux and burnt bits from the iron using some more isopropyl alcohol, and then we are good. We've got the LED attached. So the next step is to actually test it, and the way that we're going to test it is we're going to we're going to basically turn on the console while it's outside of the case just to make sure that the LED is working correctly and that all is good before we put it back together. And then once we've confirmed that, we'll then do the same thing on the Xbox Series X controller. Okay, so as you can see, I've got the console. It's plugged in outside of the case. We're only going to do this for a few seconds, so it's not going to be too big of a deal powering it up outside the case here. But as you can see, I'm going to hit the power button, and there we go. We have the red LED showing up right there. Now, it doesn't look very bright, but that's just because I'm shining a big light on it here to light what I'm trying to record here. So if I turn the lights down, you can see it a bit better there. And I also have the camera ISO set very low, so it's also not showing how bright it actually is. But once I get it back together and put it in the case, you'll see the kind of proper brightness of it. So yeah, now the next step is obviously to put this back together, and then we'll move on here to do the controller. Okay, so with the controller here, I've done a full guide, of course, how to tear down and reassemble the controller. But the reason that I've stopped at this point is because that guide shows you how to fully disassemble the controller, and you don't have to go that far with this to get to the LED. So what we can do is we can leave the rumble motors that are inside the triggers. We can leave those in the triggers. So basically what we can do is we can lift the PCB up, and even though it's still going to be attached to the triggers by those gray and black wires, what we can do is we can basically twist the PCB around so that it's quite far away from the actual bottom PCB, but still attached to the triggers. And then we should be able to get our screwdrivers in to take out all the screws on the bottom PCB, and then we can lift the bottom PCB out without actually having to take the motors out of the triggers and without completely disconnecting the top PCB from the controller, which is just maybe a bit of a quicker way of being able to access it. Plus it also makes it faster when it comes to putting the controller back together again. Okay, so now that we've lifted the PCB out, we now have the PCB that has the LED on it. It's on the underside of the PCB, obviously, and it is an 0805 LED, as I said before, so slightly smaller than the one on the console. But again, you can use an 0603 LED on the controller if you want, which is even smaller, or an 0805. And with the actual console, you can use an 0603, 0805, or a 1206, but 1206 is the proper size for the console. So all we're going to do is do the same exact thing with this one. We're just going to hold it down with some tape so it doesn't move. There's some battery prongs that stick out, which is going to mean it's going to not lie flat on the desk, but we're just going to use some duct tape to hold it. And then once again, we're going to do the same thing, add some flux, heat up both ends with the iron, back and forth until the LED lifts off. And then I've got a little bit blob of solder there on the right. Just going to take that off. And then once again, we're going to just use the desolder bead to clean up those pads, get any excess solder off the pads, then get our replacement LED, 0805 LED, and pop that onto the board, turn it over backwards just to make sure that it is on, make sure it's oriented correctly. Just like with the console, there is a white arrow already printed on the circuit board that shows the correct orientation for positive and negative. So all you have to do is line up the arrow or the little T on the back of the LED with that arrow, so that is facing the correct direction for positive and negative, which is what you want. And then we can line that up correctly. Again, hold it with one hand with the tweezers onto the pad, and then heat up one end with the iron. Add a bit of solder to the iron first, and then heat up one end. And then you can heat up the other end, add a bit more solder to each end, whatever's required to get it connected properly. And then once you're done, you can obviously clean up the circuit board with some more rubbing alcohol. So now we can just put that PCB back in the controller, put the controller back together, and we should now have matching red LEDs for the power button, for the controller, and for the console. Yeah, I also really like the green, which I wasn't expecting. Compared to the Xbox One, when I did this with the Xbox One, you know, the green looks a lot better actually on the Series X. I think it's probably something to do with the actual plastic button on the controller, especially. It's kind of darker, and it just looks better, I think, than what it looked like on an Xbox One controller. But yeah, as you can see, that's red, green, and blue, but you can also use other colors. You can get those LEDs in yellow and orange and purple and white, obviously, if you want to go back to white at some point. You can get them in all kinds of different colors. So anyway, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video or found the information useful. This is a nice little mod that you can do, a little hardware mod to customize your controller and your console. And it's great when you're doing custom paint jobs or getting some kind of skin, like a D-brand skin. You can get a matching color to go with it, which is pretty awesome. And stay tuned, because I'm going to be doing something, we're going to take this a step further, basically, on the console. Because in my next video on the Series X, I'm going to be installing LED strips on the fan on the top so that we can get some LED light coming out of the holes in the top of the console on the Series X. So that's the next plan. That's going to be a much bigger job than this, but that is going to be the next video. So if you're interested in that, please stay tuned. And yeah, that video will be out fairly soon. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll hopefully see you guys in the next one.